I have a confession to make. My name is Mark, and I really love the Resident Evil franchise. I love this series. I've played nearly every single game, I've dabbled in the books, and I fully, unapologetically love all 6 films in the movie franchise. Seriously, I grew up with Resident Evil, and it's still probably one of the only reasons why I continue to find time to play video games these days. You know, besides any of the other times when Kojima or Naughty Dog decide to release a new IP. But I get ahead of myself. You know, in reality, the Resident Evil franchise was kind of my initial introduction into the zombie horror genre, which later influenced my love for things like The Walking Dead, The Last of Us, the work of George A. Romero, and other zombified cultural touchstones of the last 50 years. With all that being said, please do not take it lightly when I say that it's finally time to introduce Alice into the main series of the video games. That's right. Milla Jovovich's Alice, the main character in what is arguably the most successful video game adaptation in history. Yeah, look, I know a lot of you are probably really unwilling to hear me out on this one for a slew of ridiculous reasons. The movies aren't canon, Alice's character is overpowered, her character is disjointed and totally inconsistent with the overall story of the video games, blah blah blah. Believe me, I get it, I just don't care. At this point, I think that all of us are aware that the last few years of the franchise, at least in terms of video games, have been a little bit of an apology for the long-term fans about the direction the series went after the groundbreaking 4th entry. I mean, it is kind of hard to hold yourself up as an old-school survival horror franchise while simultaneously trying to offer AAA action spectacle on par with the Uncharted series. However, the truth, at least as far as I'm concerned, is there wasn't really anything to apologize for. Old school horror games were awesome back in the day, but they're not really anything to write home about. And when it comes to the Resident Evil games, I have just as much fun dodging zombies and slowly creeping my way through dark hallways as I do running full steam down a narrow shaft, guns a-blazing, or punching rocks with my bare fists. The point is, there isn't a specific niche that the Resident Evil franchise has to give me in order for me to fully love the games. At the end of the day, all I really want is to see my favorite characters maneuver their way around the world of zombies and corporate greed, and Alice is indeed one of those characters. Now, before we go any further, I just want to make it clear, one of the reasons that we're talking about this right now is that recently Capcom released the much anticipated remake of Resident Evil 3, and almost immediately after they launched a social media campaign to determine whether or not the series should continue with more updated remakes or forward-looking sequels. Also, I should add that after writing this particular script, it has been heavily rumored that they are now working their way towards a Resident Evil 4 for some time in 2022, instead of doing something a little bit more like Code Veronica, which desperately needs some kind of a remake, and at least more platforms in order to be played on, which, you know, in and of itself is just another entirely different discussion that we're going to have to put on the back burner and not have right now. Anyway, at least right now, I don't think it matters how many remakes Capcom decides to push out of the Resident Evil franchise, because we all know that they will eventually need to progress the story forward in order to make this series viable. I mean, seriously, you can only do so many remakes. And that's why I have a little bit of a different suggestion with this. Now, hear me out. Why couldn't the creative team give us a genre-redefining sequel set between the events of the second game all the way to the present timeline of the series, with the main character being that of Alice from the film franchise? I mean, honestly, the first film in the franchise didn't do a ton to step on the toes of the original games. It even went out of its way to suggest that the Spencer Mansion was part of the geographic scope of the story before it made its way into the Hive in order to focus on its own original story. So here's what I'm suggesting. Start the new game off with a first-person perspective and with a silent protagonist who is smack dab in the middle of the zombie-infested horde of Raccoon City. Then you could take the first third of the game showing off your character getting out of the city while suggesting that it's taking place during the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3. Just, you know, maybe somewhere else in the city. Every game of this franchise makes Raccoon City look so incredibly small. But that's off topic. If you wanted to make a point about this character being a little bit different from all the others, maybe you can take a note from the film series and give her some psychic abilities that the player could foster throughout the game as a way of building up the tension and also switching up the game mechanics. I don't know, it's just a suggestion. I know a lot of people might think that that might be going a little too far, but given the movies and everything we know about her character, even though they're going to have to rework it, that's pretty much what you know about Alice and her character, so working that into the games would feel like a necessary step in order to make it make sense out of all of this. Anyway, moving on. The rest of the story would deal with our main character being interwoven into some of the more important events of the story, but also taking place, just off in the sidelines, being put in all of these situations, finding her way out of it. And to the very end of it, we were finally given a little bit of explanation as to who we're playing. And obviously, one of the things I would put here is you wouldn't really know anything about your character until the very end of the game, where you realize that you are in fact playing Alice from the movie franchise. And because of the story and everything that you just did in that game, now Alice's character is indelibly altered to fit into the world of the video games and coexist amongst some of our favorite characters like Leon Kennedy, Ada Wong, Jill Valentine, and the Redfields. I mean, would this be crazy? Yeah. Hell yes. But let's just be honest here for a second. There's no way that this could be more ridiculous than the plot of Resident Evil 6. And hell, maybe having a character like Alice would allow the video games to find a balance between the non-stop action nonsense and something more genuinely suspenseful. I don't know. As long as they decide to keep making more of these games, I think I'm going to be happy, but still, I think it's beyond time to find a way to introduce one of the most interesting characters from the main world already. But that's just my take.